Hi, my name's Dr. Ken Resnick, and I'm an educational psychologist and family negotiator. I've become increasingly perturbed at the number of children, this growing group of kids, that are being diagnosed with all sorts of disorders, growing up lacking grit, lacking determination, feeling of entitlement, and with no joy in their lives. And all we're doing is carrying on assessing, diagnosing, medicating, with nobody stopping to think, but what is going on here? How can we have this growing group of kids carry on doing the same things that we've been doing for years and years, and yet nothing much is changing? So there really is a concern. And there's been a little bit of research in terms of what is happening, what is the trend. And what they're finding at the moment is that there's a tendency to mollycoddle children, to overprotect them. And what is happening to kids born after 2005 is that they are growing up lacking any grit, lacking determination, as I said, lacking joy. And there's been a spike in the number of suicides with young girls, up 70%, with boys 25%. They're putting the reason down to the fact that children are being overprotected. They're being kept safe. They're not being equipped to take on life. Kids are born to take on life. The role of the parent has been omitted. In the training of all professionals qualified to deal with children, there is nothing in their training regarding the role of the parent in terms of guiding the child to adulthood. So I developed this program. What I found, I needed to do some research. I decided to do a doctorate because it seemed to be different to anything out there, but I was getting quite a lot of dramatic results right across the board. And in doing my research, I found that all other evidence-based parenting programs, the well-known ones, the ones that have been well-researched, are based on cognitive behavioral principles and social learning theory. In other words, they were equipping the parents to try and help deal with their child's behavior. What makes the Smarter Choice Parenting program very different and unique to all other parenting programs is that it helps parents understand that it is the way we parent that is the key factor to the healthy development of a child. And I think this COVID lockdown has really brought the chickens home to roost, where parents all of a sudden have had their kids on their lap 24/7. Gender-based violence has increased, child abuse has increased, huge stress, because nobody equipped the parents for their role as parents. And never mind only parents, they had to turn into teachers as well. And with kids that were undisciplined, had no boundaries, had no yearning to learn, were just left to their own devices, it's proven to be a nightmare. Because we're talking about 150 days of children not going back to school. Now the problem is, although many children were taught online, there were some kids that would have kept up to speed, the other kids that would have done virtually nothing. And now they're going back to school. And it seems that the minister is determined that no child fails. Now, the problem's still going to arise. What are we going to do with these children that have sort of missed out virtually 100 days of learning? How are they going to catch up when they don't have any will or need to want to learn? And if they're going to be pushed up a grade and find that they're not coping next year, what is going to happen? What is going to happen to these kids? And what is going wrong? I've just watched a documentary called The Social Dilemma, which is frightening because the world has gone mad. We're bringing up a generation of children that just lack motivation. They are getting carried away in a world of social media, a world of devices, games where they want to play all the time, that they're becoming addicted to, and nobody's stopping to say, wait a minute, we've got to be heading in the wrong direction. So what I'm going to help give you some insight during this brief talk is to help you understand what our role is, the impact that parenting has on our child's development, and is actually at the root of all childhood development problems. That includes behavior and learning. Because remember, learning is a choice, but why are so many kids choosing not to learn? So I'm going to give you a short overview so that you can get some insight and maybe relate to what is happening to your children and why. Why are you having such a problem in disciplining your kids, keeping your authority because the kids are in control, screaming and shouting in most homes, chaos. And kids are not working anywhere near to their potential. So we have to actually reconsider, I think, what we're doing, because it is being shown that the generation of children that are now slowly becoming teenagers and will become adults or have no feeling, have no empathy, unmotivated, have attitude, dropping out, parents sitting with a problem, marriages taking strain. So we're sitting with a real problem. And what I've found with the program, once parents are prepared to take on the responsibility, the program equips them with the skills and the tools to help them or help empower them to actually manage their kids in an effective way. Because at the end of the day, parenting is a job. It is a management job. Yet we don't know what we're doing. In other words, it's like baking a cake. We're the bakers. We've got the ingredients, which are our kids, born healthy, and yet we have not got the recipe. So we only try our best. And what happens? Like with any baker, baking a cake without the recipe, the chances are quite high that the cake will flop. By the time they're 16 and that cake has flopped, we are sitting with a problem. But what are we doing? Taking the analogy of the baker. We're sending the cake off to some scientists to try and work out what's wrong with the cake without ever looking at the baker. But what I have found, and the more I'm doing this program, I've been doing it for the last 15 years, virtually all childhood problems can be resolved if parents are prepared to take the responsibility, make the effort, work together, and help manage their children in a way that's going to equip them with the skills to take on life. So if we have a look, what is our role in actual fact? We need to understand what our role is. Because if we look at that statement, a child is someone who wants to become someone. Every human child is born facing life, itching to get out there. They're born with passion. They're born with a sense of curiosity. They're born with energy. They start crawling. They start walking. You see, young kids don't walk, they run. They just want to take on life. All of us wanted to take on life. Why is it that so much goes wrong? Nobody really develops to their full potential. What is the reason? The second statement. A child can only become an adult with the help of an adult. Note it says adult. It doesn't say parent. Adult. Any adult can bring up a child. Children can't bring up themselves. They're totally dependent on an adult to bring them up. Could be a step parent. Could be a foster parent. Could be an adopted parents that adopted the children, etc. But it needs to be an adult. Here we're stuck because this truism is totally being ignored in the training of all professionals, where the whole approach is let's take the kids out, let's analyze the kid, let's not even worry about the parenting. And all these disorders, from ADHD to oppositional defiant, etc., are just symptomatically diagnosed. They can't find a brain problem, be just thumb-sucking with medication. And of course, medication can work in the sense that it'll calm a kid down. Is it going to motivate a kid, help him be fired up to really take on life? No. So we've got to now get down to basics. And as a matter of fact, if our ancestors parented like we're parenting now, we would be extinct. We wouldn't have got out of the cave. So we are overprotecting our kids, allowing them sit on devices for far too long, hang around with adults far too much, not socialized, opting out, not wanting to go to school, not keen to learn, choosing not to read. We've got a huge problem. How do we stimulate children? How can we help them become more motivated, to develop a passion to want to learn? We're born with a brain. We're born to learn. But what is going wrong? So if we have a look, we as parents are the key role players in dealing with and resolving all behavioral and emotional problems in our children. It is our responsibility. And if we have a look, parenting can be seen as educative activities. Now, what do we mean by educative activities? I mentioned earlier that virtually all other parenting programs, sort of psychological activities, helping you deal with a child's behavior. We are educators, together with teachers, which I'm going to explain in a moment. In other words, we should be equipping kids with the necessary skills needed to survive. Now, where have you heard any parent telling you that they're bringing their kid up to survive in order to confront and deal with all the challenges that life is going to present to them? That is our role. And they are our indicator in terms of how well we're doing the job. In other words, they accompany us on a journey into adulthood. They are sort of barometer to give us an idea of how well we're doing by how they're responding. So if they're lacking grit, they're lacking motivation, they got attitude, they're cheeky, they just want to sit in front of the TV, we are doing something wrong. We've got to understand that. And we've also got to understand our role as a guide. Because to give an example, if we as a group had to go into the Amazon, we're totally dependent on a guide who has knowledge of the environment. If that guide sees something, starts panicking, runs, screams at everybody, that whole group is going to have a problem. And we adults. So you can imagine with kids, if their guide is someone that they can't really trust, that loses it, that starts screaming and shouting, we are going to end up with what we're ending up with now, chaos. So if we have a look, we talk about the educative role of parents and teachers. So basically, to go back, let's have a look at the Khoisan. There's a nice photo of them there. The Khoisan are parenting like they have for ages, back to the year dot. Their sole role is to equip their kids with the skills to handle that hostile environment, to recognize what they can, what they can't eat, to hunt, to take shelter, to build shelters. You're not going to find an ADHD Khoisan child, or an oppositional defiant Khoisan child, or depressed Khoisan child, because that is what it was right at the beginning, where parenting was instinctive. But what has happened? We've got too clever. We were born with a brain, but unfortunately it's a rational brain, which makes it problematic, because with parenting, 1 and 1 does not add up to 2. So as a result, we do the best for our kids, giving them far too much, thinking they'll be happy, giving in to them because we're going with their feelings all the time. We don't want them to be sad, and we've got to now talk in a different tone to try and make them happy. But it's not how it should be. We've got to help kids deal with life, deal with disappointments, learn to persevere, learn to maintain that passion, that sense of curiosity, the determination to be well socialized. That is what we're supposed to do. But we are not doing that because it's not common sense. So if we have a look, the educative role of parents, we are the primary educators. As I mentioned, we're equipping them with skills to deal with their life. Teachers are secondary educators. They are imparting knowledge, getting children to learn about the world, to learn what's going on around us, different subjects, languages, etc., etc. Unfortunately, in the training of teachers, there is nothing on parenting. What does that mean? That means when they've got a class full of kids and they're having problems, their first response is to have the kid assessed. They're not looking and trying to understand that this poor little guy in the back has no friends, sitting on his own, never puts up his hand, not performing well, has got an issue. He's got to have an issue. Why? But what do? They just let the parents know something's wrong with this child. They need help. So this is what's happening. And more kids are going for help. And we genuinely don't know what we're doing. So what has really in fact happened from the time when our ancestors were parenting out of instinct? As we've evolved, the emphasis has now shifted where the focus is on the child, and the adult-child educative relationship has been sidelined. Doesn't exist. Parents are sitting on the side where it's become the norm to say, no, my kid's in therapy. And yours? No, mine's on medication. It's become like this is the norm. This is the norm. It's abnormal for kids not to be on medication, and nobody's questioning it. Because I think the majority of parents are quite happy to hear that somebody's going to sort their child out. And unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. And there's lots and lots of money being spent on all these assessments, very little improvement, without anybody stopping to think, but whoa, we've got to be going in the wrong direction. And an even bigger worry is that the universities are training psychologists pretty much like they've been trained for years and years and years. Educational psychologists being trained the same way to assess kids, to diagnose kids, and to give the kid therapy, with no training on the parenting. And it's very, very worrying, because I think anybody can have a look at what's going on and say, wait a minute, we're doing something wrong. How can we carry on doing a job every day with so little movement or positive result in the child, and nobody's stopping to question? This was unheard of years back. Kids survived. I know when we were at school, it was the kids that really came from poor homes that were deprived, that didn't do well at school. But now, so many kids are not doing well at school, and there's a reason for it. So if we have a look, what we've got to understand is that every child has the potential to self-actualize. Many of you might have heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Well, there's a hierarchy of needs for children as well. And what do I mean by self-actualizing? A child is born in a cot. A parent keeps them in their cot. And as they get older, their world should open up to them. Parents should open up the world to a child. Because remember, a child is in constant communication with their world. They're seeing strangers. They're meeting friends. They're meeting new people, new adults. They're in communication. We've got to help them deal with that. So they've all got the potential to self-actualize. So if you take an example, a 6-year-old self-actualizing can't wait to go to school, can't wait to read, can't wait to do maths, can't wait to get involved in a situation where they want to try their best. They pick themselves up if they lose, want to try harder, behave appropriately, are well socialized. That's all we want. Because if they're not, we start having issues. And there are many kids that are crying when they're taken to school. But there's a hierarchy of needs that need to be met in order for children to self-actualize. And because of time restraints, I'm only going to deal with the bottom two because we are getting stuck. So their basic needs are their physical needs. Every human child needs to be fed and needs to be clothed. So a child that is hungry, starving, on the streets, freezing cold, got a brain, achieves nothing, can't be taught. Because unless we meet that need, with that brain, they can't be taught. And if Einstein was born on the streets, there was no ways he could have been Einstein. But virtually, all functional families meet that need. Once we have met that need, the next need is to help a child feel emotionally safe. In other words, the child is totally dependent on their parent knowing what they're doing. And if you know what you're doing, you know how to stay calm. An example of the guy that I spoke to you about. He can't panic. But however, in the majority of homes today, from my experience, there's screaming and shouting. When there's screaming and shouting in a home, the children do not feel safe. And if they're not feeling safe, they're going to become insecure. The parenting is going to be inconsistent. And we're going to have problems because once we got a bit of chaos, once we got that anxiety in the home, all of a sudden the kids are showing up with learning difficulties, showing up with the symptoms of ADHD or oppositional defiant disorder or the latest, which is an anxiety disorder. And we're not even questioning it. We've all got a bit of anxiety. Kids are not born with an anxiety disorder, but how can we not relate that to the parent? A very anxious mom that really is not coping, those children are going to be anxious. I mean, kids are being diagnosed with an anxiety disorder, placed on some hectic medication, and where the parent's told, well, there's nothing you can do about it, because it's either genetic or something else. Just be very careful. Pussyfoot around the child because they're very sensitive. Well, how is the parent going to be able to carry out their role in a confident manner where they know and feel safe with what they're doing and confident with what they're doing? So we're getting stuck on the second need. And that is why there are so many kids that are not going any higher. They're not wanting to learn. They learn because they have to. They learn because they're told to. They're being helped when they come home. In other words, they've got no real need to want to learn, to want to read. And it's becoming a problem, and nobody seems to be picking this up. So what I've observed I was 20 years at a private school as the psychologist and counsellor, and I did hundreds of these psycho-ed assessments, maybe even thousands. What I've observed in all the kids and families that I've seen is that kids with whatever disorder they're diagnosed with, whatever learning problem they're diagnosed with, have problem characteristics. So let's have a look. So the first one is that they only tend to like to do what they enjoy doing. The moment they're not interested, Mom, I need help. Mom, I don't want to. Mom, I can't. I can't, Mom. I can't. Help me. They need Mom to be sitting in a room while they're playing. They're not letting Mom out of their sight. So as a result, they're being given things just to keep them quiet because shame. They are unhappy and they do feel a bit sad because it's hard. So without realizing it, what are we actually doing? The moment a kid is given things, activities that only they enjoy doing, life is about taking the challenge of things that we don't like doing. And what is happening? These kids lack perseverance. Because the moment the going gets tough, they're out of there. Mom has to help, Dad has to help. And then we got a problem. They come home, Mom, help me with my maths. They haven't opened the book. They're not taking up the challenges. So they're giving up. And that opting out is a huge problem. You'll find that kids with learning difficulties opt out. They can't because they don't even think they can. And that becomes a huge problem. So what happens, they start avoiding challenges. The moment they're unsure of the outcome, they'd rather not do it. Whatever the activity is, they need to not want to run a race in case they come last, or swim in a gala because in case they come last. They don't want to play a sport because they lose. They don't win, and they don't enjoy not winning. So they tend to avoid challenges. And on top of that, they start developing a fear of failure where they believe that they don't have the ability. They believe that they don't have the intelligence to maybe cope, and they're scared to even try. So the opting out becomes a big problem. And what I do with parents, when I tell them these characteristics, they all nod their heads. They say, that's my child. But what does it mean? It means that these kids are very dependent on somebody who is being there to help them, which is usually the parent. If it's not the parents, it's an extra lesson teacher or some remedial teacher. Now that dependency is the key problem with children having difficulties, having issues, having learning problems. Dependent children don't feel good about themselves. They have low self-esteem and they lack self-confidence. So they go to school not feeling that confident, not putting their hand up in class because they're always having to have help. And we're not even noticing this. We're not even helping parents or making parents aware that the more dependent we make a child, the more helpless we're making those children. So what do we mean? I came across called learned helplessness. And I suggest that you Google that term and read about it. They've done quite a lot of research regarding learned helplessness in children. Just coined by a psychologist called Martin Seligman. They've done a lot of research. And what they've found is a lot of the characteristics that I've observed. So we're encouraging children to actually give up without realizing it. Because so many kids are going to school because they have to rather than they want to. And when they don't have to listen in class because when they come home, somebody's going to help them. Whether it's mom or au pair or extra lessons. And there are schools that are offering extra lessons to grade ones. Every grade one can read if they're healthy and can add up 1 and 1. But yet they need extra lessons. So without being aware of it, we're encouraging kids to give up. What is this doing? This is having a huge impact on their grit and determination, which are key factors in success in life. They are the key factors, and we've got to install kids with grit and determination, and nobody's showing us how. And if we don't do it early on, and they become teenagers, well, they just give up. They're going to go nowhere. Because if they become adults and they want to learn how to have grit and determination, they're going to have to sit in therapy. But they don't have the grit or determination to see through therapy. So this most vital needs that we have to instill in our children, we haven't got a clue. And it is all about parenting. And we've got far too many kids lacking grit and determination. You can see it in the quality of leaders that we're having. That pool is getting smaller and smaller. So, as I mentioned earlier on in my introduction, we've adopted a safety-first mentality to keep kids safe, to make sure that we don't hurt their feelings, to make sure that they don't struggle too much because they're feeling sad, etc. So we actually, without realizing it, we're encouraging the dependency and the helplessness. What is the consequence of that? It then develops into unacceptable behavior as well as learning difficulties. Where again they're opting out. Why should they? Somebody else is going to do it for them. Why should they learn? They don't want to. So we're encouraging this with the parents, and we're sitting with this huge problem. And that is why kids are growing up. Social media is causing a major problem, as I mentioned earlier, with girls. Kids lacking joy, evidently hospitals, the amount of cases that are being, of kids being admitted, young girls that are really cutting themselves, doing all sorts of things. And nobody's stopping to think, but why? Why? Never used to happen. So parenting skills need to be acquired. And that is what this program does. It gives you an understanding. We cannot be perfect parents. Why? Because we were brought up by parents who only tried their best, but they didn't know what they were doing. Did they ever acknowledge that they screwed up? They make you feel bad when they brought you into the world and they screwed you up, but you've got to appreciate them forever. And then you marry someone. That's also not okay. So the odds of having a perfect child are not going to happen. But we can be a good enough parent. And that is what's really, really important. So what are my concerns? I just believe that we are heading in the wrong direction. We've got to stop, because if we don't stop, again, looking at that movie, we are really destroying ourselves. Generations that are going to basically just destroy themselves. So let's have a look at what the usual approach is. So the usual approach is that teachers will phone up parents. Listen, we're really worried about your kid. They disrupt the class. Sure, they got ADHD. So many grade 1 teachers believe they're qualified to diagnose ADHD. There's learning difficulties. There's poor concentration. They're zoning out. They're daydreaming. And they're not completing their work. So this is what parents are told. What are they supposed to do about it? Well, the teacher will say to them, well, maybe we can get away with a bit of occupational therapy, a bit of maybe play therapy, or maybe speech therapy. Why are so many kids in speech therapy? I've noticed that the majority of kids whine. They don't talk properly. And they're in speech therapy because no parent is correcting them. Parents have become so used to kids whining that it's become a major, major problem. From these recommendations, these kids are recommended for these therapies and the role of the parent is omitted. So what happens? They either put on medication, very little change is experienced, and 2 or 3 years later they've got to go through the same assessments with maybe slightly different recommendations. But how can the role of the parent be omitted from this as being a reason? I'm going to give you a little bit of insight, is how the parenting has a huge impact on the child's development. And here we can see the parenting aspect is ignored while we're just sending them off for this therapy with absolutely none of the therapists being able to tell the parents what they need to do to parent a child that's been diagnosed. For instance, if a parent goes to the occupational therapist, the play therapist, and the speech therapist and asks them, what do I do as a parent? They'll get 3 different replies, which is really concerning because parents become confused, anxious, and the problem is exacerbated. So we move on. Parenting is all about management. It's a management job. We're running our little business, which is our family. The kids are employees. We've got to know what we're doing. It is only a job. It gets contaminated by being too emotionally involved, but our job is to equip kids to take on life. That's all it is. So there are a number of parenting styles. I've named quite a few there, but I'm only going to dwell on the one. The laissez-faire, the free and easy sort of parenting, where there's chaos in the home. There's no boundaries. Kids can watch TV whenever they like, go to the fridge, take out what they like, leave a mess, leave toys lying around, shout, scream, etc. Now those kids have got to go into a classroom that's structured, where they've got to listen to the teacher, etc. The odds of them concentrating are not going to be that high. As a result, parents are going to be fine. Listen, we're just worried about your kid. It doesn't seem to be concentrating. He's very jumpy. Well, what do? An assessment. Parenting looked at? Not at all. So all these styles, which I'm not going to speak about now, but which I deal with in the parenting masterclass, can create the dependency, the lack of motivation, the fear of failure, the low self-esteem, the opting out, the helplessness, the grit, no perseverance, which in itself can then manifest into your attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder, your oppositional defiant disorder, your incaprices, which is soiling, bedwetting, school refusal, and virtually a whole range of disorders that are being diagnosed with kids. This can happen because of parenting. And what I've found is that when parents are given the tools and take responsibility, we've had success right across the board. With some of those conditions or disorders that nobody can deal with, like soiling, etc. So how can we ignore this? Because if we have a look, there is the usual approach. That's what everybody's doing. Something's missing, and that is parenting management. So by omitting the parenting management and carrying on doing what we're doing, bringing up kids that are so problematic, that are turning into adults that are really, really problematic, that are going to battle with relationships, we've got a problem. So that is what the program's about. It's helping parents understand their role and how much change they can bring about in their families if they are given the tools to manage their children appropriately. So the whole idea of the program, How Do We Parent Effectively, is to understand that everything a child does is a choice. So the key to this approach is to allow your child to make choices, but they've got to understand the consequences of bad choices. To give you an example, we haven't learned by society. Society operates with rules and consequences. We have a good idea that if we commit a crime or break a law, what the consequences are going to be. We can use talking on our cell phone in the car as an example. We stopped by a cop, 500 Rand fine. We know what the consequences are. But imagine if we didn't. And we hear that a friend gets off with a bribe, we try our luck and we put in jail for 30 years. How is society going to function? Yet that is how we parent. We react, we threaten, we warn. If you do that once more, I'm warning you, I'm not going to speak again. And then boom, we blow up. How can that create any stability in a family? It's like a motorboat without a rudder. We're going to be all over the place. The kids are going to be all over the place. So what do I mean by making choices and spelled out consequences? To give you an idea, in our family, we had a rule that if I'd recorded a TV program and the kids wanted to delete it, they had to ask me. If they didn't, meant that they didn't want to watch TV for a week. Simple as that. Anyway, one day, a movie I recorded had been deleted. Turned out to be Erica. Called her and I said, X, I don't believe you don't want to watch TV for a week. She said, why? I said, well, you deleted my program. She accepted it. But after 3 days, she came to me and she said, Ken, when can I watch TV again? And I said, X, I wanted you to watch during all the agreed times. But when you deleted that movie, you said to me that you don't want to watch TV for a week. So it's a week. No arguments, no problems. She accepted it. So in this way, what change takes place? Children then learn to own their own problems and take responsibility for their choices where you can stay calm. It's a mind shift change. I didn't talk down to Erica. I didn't threaten her. I didn't talk to her with a big finger. She owned the problem. She accepted it. It was a deal we made. So you need to negotiate rules, boundaries, etc. with your kids and spell out the consequences and then get their buy. So they've got to know that if they don't want to eat their supper, they don't have to. But what does it mean? It just means that they want to go to their room. It means that if they get hungry later on, kitchen's closed. They're choosing to go to bed hungry. You're not depriving them. They made the deal. You can stay calm. They'll go hungry, but they're not going to starve to death. And when they wake up in the morning, you just got to say to them, listen, I just want to know, are you going to have supper tonight or rather just go and play in your room? They will have supper. So the whole idea is to understand how do we make it their problem. We can't believe, for instance, that they don't want their pair of shoes if they're left lying around. Don't you want the shoes? They do. Well, what does it mean? They've got to be put back. If they're not, they're saying to you, I don't want my shoes, you can confiscate them, and you confiscate them. So we've got to negotiate and help children understand how to own the problem, that they're not being punished. So if we have a look, choices and preemptive consequences. So preempting is vital. So what does this do? It transfers responsibility from parents onto their kids, where you're able to maintain your authority because you're not punishing them, not your problem. They made the choice. We don't understand why. So what does that do? You experience less frustration and you're more in control. And that's what you want. And if you can create a situation where your child has chosen, for instance, to have a temper tantrum, just means they don't like their family. We're very sad, we love them, but the only room that belongs to them in the house is their bedroom. So they're choosing to go to their room. And if they decide they want to like or love their family again, they're welcome to come out, but these are the rules that are in the family, and they've got to accept that. So it's all a question of knowing how to talk to them, knowing how to communicate with them, and knowing how to make it their problem. So preempting, as I've just mentioned, is very important. I've discussed that. All situation, when you're going out, explain the rules. Explain what's going to happen, what your expectations are, what they can, what they can't do. Get their buy-in. And then I've got these other tips. For instance, if their friends are going to come over to play and your child has a tendency not to always share, you say to him, listen, my boy, your friends are coming over. Which toys don't you want them to play with? Let's put them away. Are you happy that they play with these toys? Sure. Remember, if you're not going to allow them to play with the toys that you agreed that they could play with, means you don't want them, they're going to be confiscated. Deal? Deal. Or when their friends do come over, call the kids in and tell them what the rules of the house are. They can't just go to the fridge. They'll get tea when they ask at a certain time. They can't run through the house. They can't play in the house. They can only play in the playroom or the bedroom. Spell out the rules. And it works brilliantly for birthday parties. You get all the kids together. Let them understand All eating is done at tables. Anybody running around with food, ice cream means they don't want birthday cake. Are you guys all happy with the rule? Fine. Anybody wants to go to the toilet, you go around, show them what they got to do. Nobody runs to the house. Kids will agree, and you will not have a problem. But you can't have a group of kids together with no supervision. You've got to have some adult in charge. So how do we speak to kids? This is where we are going wrong. We're not like I spoke to Erica. We're speaking down to kids. And no kid likes to be spoken down to. No adult likes the big lecture. It doesn't really work. So I gave you an example, for instance, of a child that's refusing to eat their dinner. Make it their problem. They don't want to brush their teeth. Strange choice. You child. Don't have to brush their teeth. What does it mean? They don't brush their teeth. It just means that they want to be 1 year old. Because 1 year olds don't brush their teeth. So you'd never have to brush your teeth again. But it will mean you want to be 1. Being 1 means 1 year olds don't watch TV. You want to eat baby food. You go to bed straight after supper. You don't get an iPad. You play with little rattles, which could be quite exciting. And all your 6-year-old toys will just be packed away. And if you want us to give them away, it's going to be totally up to you. So you let me know. Would you rather be 1 and never brush your teeth again, or 6? Brush your teeth, keep your toys, and so on. They will definitely want to be 6. And that is the end of the problem. So the whole idea is to know, don't go off at them. Don't threaten them. Don't make them apologize. Don't try and work out why they made the decision. You know, like for instance, I had one mom, kid chose to go to his bedroom. When he came out, they wanted to know the reason why, what made him behave that way. You do nothing. You just put it to bed. Short and sweet. In other words, consequences need to be short and sweet, and they take the consequence. But when they've had the consequence, they join the family. There's no problem. We've got to get into that mindset. We don't have to go into big lecture time. So at the end of the day, there's nothing wrong with your child. You've got to believe that your child is a person who needs someone like you to help them reach their potential. Your child is a person who's dependent on you to help them to become independent. And your child is a person who can and must take responsibility for the choices they make. And I'd like to end with a story with a little kid of 5 who was bullying kids, breaking toys, peeing in her pants, out of control. Anyway, the parents came to see me. We did the structures of the program, implemented it, and I made a deal with her. We got rid of the pooing part very easily, but I said to her, because that's a choice, but I said to her, look, bullying kids, breaking toys is a choice, but it's a crime. I never threatened her, I just spoke to her like that. So all it means is that when you do that, you just got to tell a policeman. And then he will help you understand what happens if you do bully children, etc. But I made sure that she wasn't scared. Anyway, she wasn't too happy with that one, but she agreed. Mom then went to the police station, spoke to a policeman, told her what we were trying to do, and that maybe she'd have to bring her daughter in, and he was fine, because there's often a child expert in many police stations. Nevertheless, things went really well. There was a big change, but maybe a month or so, she lost it. Bullied some kids, broke toys. Mom was called, take the kid home, got in the car. Kid said to the mom, where are we going? She said, well, remember, we made a deal. We're going to have to tell a policeman. Never scared the child. Off they went to the police station. The cop happened to be there. He said to her, sweetheart, I don't believe you want to come and live here. No, she doesn't want to live here. So he said to her, well, look, if you're going to break toys and bully kids means you want to come live here. She said, no, I'm never going to break any more toys or bully children. He said, great choice. But remember, if you want to come live here, you can. Off she went. When she got to the car, the first thing she did was say to her mom, Mom, I made a bad choice. Hey. Now, if you can get your child to acknowledge that, you're well on the way to doing a good job, to helping a child understand consequence of choices, but nobody getting angry with them, but they taking consequences. So with that, I need to tell you maybe more about the actual parenting masterclass. At the masterclass, it's 3.5 to 4 hours long. It equips you with all the skills that you're going to need, the practical skills to implement the program, gives you a background, a bit of the theory behind the program, helps you understand fully how parenting impacts on the parenting, and how when we can sort that out, we can resolve virtually all problems that we're having with our children. So you get a lot of in-depth understanding and knowledge of what our role is as a parent in order to successfully deal with the whole gamut of disorders that children are being diagnosed with. So during the part of the course is we deal with structures like a roster, like pocket money, helping them take responsibility, deal with their homework, etc. It covers the whole gamut of what a child has to deal with in their world. Right, well, I hope that you found the insights that we shared with you valuable and that you are able to implement some of the ideas at home. You are welcome to use the promotional voucher to receive a 10% discount when you sign up for a parenting masterclass by using the link below. My name is Dr. Ken Resnick, and you are very welcome to contact the Smarter Choice Parenting team if you need any assistance or have any questions. We look forward to seeing you at our next parenting masterclass.